Okay, so the claim is that gospel writers borrowed from mythology. That's the soundbite. So in order to discover the truth, whether there is any truth to this claim or the truth behind the claim, we need to, hello everyone, like in advance, we need to look at like 4 different areas, I guess. We need to look at the history, the actual history or mythological history, the recorded facts surrounding the preceding pagan narratives and assess their veracity. We need to, so those are the claims. We need to look at the actual portrayals in comparison to Christ. We need to look for and expose any logical fallacies along the way that are being made by the claimants, as it were. And we need to look at why the New Testament Gospels are trustworthy depictions of the historical and true Jesus Christ, because, of course, there are false Christs bouncing around in other religions, as it were. So the claim that Jesus was a myth or an exaggerated portrayal, or an exaggeration, actually, or mimicry of these preceding pagan deities / figures, came around in the 1800s. They originated in German theologians of the time, liberal German theologians, 1800s. So in a nutshell, what they said was that Jesus was nothing more than a copy of fertility gods, the dying and the rising again, etc., from various geological and chronological places, if that makes sense, along the timeline, always preceding Christ, obviously, for the claim of plagiarism, and in various different cultures and locations. So Tammuz in Mesopotamia, Adonis in Syria, Attis in Asia Minor, and Horus in Egypt, off the top of my head. Off the top of the page, but I mean, there are more that just popped into mind, but let's stick with those. Yeah, there are more, actually. Okay, anyway. The fact is that none of the claims, none of the books containing the theories, the pseudo-intellectualized or theologized theories were taken serious at the time. Academics of the day didn't rush around, attacking the claims because they didn't take them seriously. That's something that's, it's relatively important. Obviously, new technologies and new means of assessing situations comes up, but at the time, at least, it wasn't a big deal, as it were. The assertion that Jesus was just a recycled Tammuz, the Mesopotamian figure that I mentioned, was investigated by contemporary scholars and determined to be utterly false. So I guess they just, thought, whatever. I don't know if scholars actually think like that. Hello, everybody else. So it's only more recently, I guess the advent of the internet is a blessing and a curse. More of a blessing, I would suggest. But it's recently that the assertions have resurrected themselves. Like most heresies, these aren't technically heresies, but there's nothing much new about heretical thinking. We've been busy over the last couple of thousand years. So almost with a certainty, you can trace any nonsense heresy today back to an original form of it. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses back to Arius, that kind of thing. Yes, so the ease of access to information, the mass distribution facilities for information from unaccountable sources without Joe Rogan popping up, fact checking, etc., has led to the resurrection, no pun intended, of these claims. Let's call them claims and not twaddle. Let's call them claims for a minute. So the next area, I guess, that we need to look at, do these mythological figures, gods with small g's, of ancient times, do they actually mirror the person that we know with certainty and of truth from biblical source, like the Bible actually, is Jesus Christ? Do they really mirror the true Jesus? So an example of a much more modern iteration of these claims is Zeitgeist It's a film. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but the claims made within the film Zeitgeist about the Egyptian god Horus are these: that he was born on December 25th. I know that date. Weirdly, our claim is not that Jesus was born on, anyhow, born on December 25th, of a virgin, Isis Mary, apparently, according to Zeitgeist and their scriptwriters. A star in the east proclaimed his arrival. 3 kings came to adore the newborn saviour. He became a child prodigy, teaching at age 12. At 30, he was baptized, in inverted commas, and began a ministry, also in inverted commas. Horus had 12 disciples. I'm just going to do bunny ears from here. Horus was betrayed. He was crucified, allegedly. He was buried for 3 days. I mean, like, on the surface, it's like, wow, I know a guy this exact same thing happened to. And was resurrected after 3 days. However, like, I don't want to burst anyone's bubble regarding fiction, but the actual writings and source materials regarding Horus have been to this day competently examined, re-examined, and this is the actual. These are the actual findings. Horus was born to Isis, not the Islamic State in Syria organization, but the Egyptian goddess. But there's no mention in historical sources or archaeological sources, etc., of her being called Mary at all, one bit, full stop. So that's made up. Also, Mary is an anglicized form of her real name of Miriam. So Mary, wasn't even used in the original text of the Bible. So to claim that, do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make sense to say that the Bible copied with a different name from the now modernized name that's being inserted into history. That's nonsense. Isis was not a virgin. So the mother of Horus was not a virgin. She was the widow of Osiris. Don't know if you've heard of him. And conceived Horus with Osiris. So had a father, is the nutshell, like the soundbite. Horus was born during the month of Koyak, maybe, October/November, not December 25th. Like, a lot of these, what's the word, contenders for the originator of the narrative have December 25th for a birthday. I don't know why, because very, very few, I would imagine, Christians claim that his actual date of birth was the 25th of December. There's no mention, like in the Bible, for example, as to his actual birth date. Moving up, like, coming along with Horus, there's no record of 3 kings visiting him at his birth. The Bible never states the actual number anyway of magi that came to see the Christ when he was born. Horus is not a savior in any way, shape or form. Didn't die for anybody, for example. There are no accounts of Horus being a teacher at 12, like, literally just stacking up nonsense after, baseless claim after baseless claim. He was not baptized, even with the inverted commas, like, he just wasn't. The only account of Horus that involves water is one story where he is torn to pieces, with Isis, his mother, requesting that the crocodile god fish him out of the water and save him. He didn't have a ministry either, inverted commas or otherwise. He didn't have 12 disciples. Like, you can see where this is going. According to the accounts of Horus, the not verified, that's the incorrect term, the real life ones, as opposed to the Hollywood type ones, Horus had 4 demigods that followed him. Like, that's a stretch for disciples, but yeah, 4 demigods. And there were some indications of 16 human followers and an unknown number of blacksmiths that went into battle with him, which is nice. There's no account of Horus being betrayed by anybody, certainly not a friend. He didn't die by crucifixion. There are various accounts of his death, so it's contested as to how he died, if he lived, if you see what I mean. However, none of them involve crucifixion, which would be wild, like, in and of itself, seeing as how it hadn't been invented yet. There's no account of him being buried for 3 days. Wasn't resurrected. No account of him coming out of the grave with the body that he went in with. And some accounts have Horus / Osiris at this point now being brought back to life by Isis and then becoming Lord of the Underworld, taking over Hades, as it were, depending on what they call it, potentially the Underworld. When you stick those side by side on a piece of paper, to say there is little, if any, resemblance is like potentially an overstatement of the affairs. Like, it's just almost straight down the like, you know, potentially I've gone out with 16 people before. Like, it just, do you know what I mean? I have no disciples. So, yeah, that's that out of the way. That's Horus done and dusted. So Jesus now is also compared to, or wrongly claimed to be imitating in the narrative, Mithras, by those who assert that Jesus is a myth himself. So all of the above descriptions that I gave of, or preceding even, descriptions of Horus are applied to Mithras. Again, it's almost like sloppy writing at this stage. So born of a virgin, being crucified, rising in 3 days, yada, 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 yada. So now we turn to the Mithras myth, as it were, to find out what the myth actually says. He was born out of a solid rock. It's pretty difficult to think of a less Virgin Mary type mother arrangement than a lump of solid rock. Not a woman at all, in fact. I guess rocks are technically virgins, but I don't really want to get into that conversation. So he firstly, I mean, he's quite big in the game in terms of myths. He battled first with the sun, you know, the big hot fiery thing in the sky. Well, English people, use your imagination. And then with a primeval bull. Sounds a bit Zeusy, but it's not. Thought to be the first act of creation. I had an inordinate amount of time for mythology, like when I was younger, and I can just see the shape of that story. Like, there's some wild goings on in people's imaginations. Mithras killed the bull. The bull then became the ground of life for the human race. No extra deets at this time. But if anyone knows the story of Aphrodite and how she came about, use your imagination. Mithras' birth was celebrated on December 25th, along with winter solstice. So we've got something at least. There is no mention of his being a great teacher. There's no mention of Mithras having 12 disciples. The idea of him having 12 disciples may have come from a mural in which he's surrounded by the 12 signs of the zodiac, like astronomy type stuff. Astrology. I do apologize to any astronomers. Mithras had no bodily resurrection. When he completed his earthly mission, he was taken to paradise in a chariot. He was still alive and kicking at the time. I don't know if he kicked. I just made that bit up. But he was still alive, as alive as a myth can be, when he ascended, as it were, or when he got a lift. What else? Tertullian, you've heard of him. He's an early Christian writer. He did write about Mithraic cultists, so people who followed this, like pagan, this cult, reenacting resurrection scenes. However, this obviously occurred well after the New Testament was in existence for Tertullian to be observing these things. So if any plagiarism was being done at that time, we can just posit that claim back at the door of the cultists. More examples of pagan myths and demigods, etc., could be given of Krishna, Attis, Dionysus, and other mythological small g gods. However, take my word for it, but I do have a little flashcard thingy that I guess I could share somewhere. It's all the same results. It's just like a nope, 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 and a big fat nope. Ultimately, our historical Jesus, as portrayed in the Bible, is unique in terms of, circumstances and his mother and his death, resurrection, his birthday, etc. the alleged similarities, if we're going to charitably call what's going on here, with his story and the pagan myths are so greatly exaggerated that it becomes to a suspicious mind it just looks like foul play, as it were, is afoot. Let's think. Whilst the tales of Mithras, Horus, and the others go before, they predate Christianity, that's a definite. There is minuscule, there's very little historical attestation or records of the actual beliefs of those cults and religions. The vast majority of the earliest writings on those religions date from around the 3rd and the 4th century after Christ. So that goes some way also to dismissing who copied who, as it were. To assume that the pre-Christian beliefs of the cults that have no written record anywho were identical to post-Christian beliefs is at best a bit silly. A more logical approach would be to attribute any, potentially all similarities, any, not all of them, between those religions as the other way around, as Christianity coming around and being copied, as it were, or plagiarized, especially the teachings. So now we come on to the next logical fallacies. Let's have a look at those, and we're going to look at the logical fallacies committed whilst making these claims by opponents of Christianity, or people who assert that Jesus was a myth, or at least those that claim he borrowed from the mystery religions. So 2 fallacies, the false cause and the terminological fallacy. It's not as complicated as it sounds. So if one thing comes before another thing, if one thing precedes the other, you can be mistaken to assert that one has caused the other, as it were. So causative, one asserts that potentially this thing happened first, so maybe it caused the other thing. And this is the fallacy of the false cause. So an example is if, roosters may very well crow before the sun rises every morning, wherever they are. They're not near me. They may do that. That doesn't mean in any way, shape or form that they cause the sun to rise by crowing, if you see what I mean. So, prior to the accounts, pre-Christianized accounts of mythological gods, where we do find them, they don't, we know that there aren't enough to back up any claims, even if they did, even if they showed a close resemblance, such as it was, and they don't, it doesn't mean that they caused the gospel writers to invent a false Jesus. It doesn't make sense. It's like attributing science fiction as the cause, 1950s science fiction show to a 1970s rocket launch or something in real life, as it were. So the terminological fallacy, this happens when words are redefined in order solely to prove a point. So you remember the film I mentioned, Zeitgeist, that says Horus began his ministry. That's the claim in the film. The word ministry is here being redefined. Horus had no actual ministry at all, nothing like the ministry that we know Christ had, but we can attribute to him, as it were, in terms of what the word means. Those who claim a link between Mithras and Christ, when talking about a baptism, that initiated the potential cult members into the cult of Mithras, need to look at their definition of baptism. Mithraic priests would put the initiates, as it were, into a pit, suspend a ball, they love a ball over the pit, far out, and then slit the bull's stomach, like some 1980s gunk show, Saturday morning kids thing, And then obviously the initiate would just be covered in entrails, innards, blood, gore, nastiness, that kind of thing. I would, like, it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but I would confidently assert that is nothing like my baptism. Like, even though mine was that long ago, I don't actually remember the initial one. So, yeah, come on. Like, it's a stretch of the word. It's a terminological fallacy to just make up a new meaning for the word, like, because you're desperate to try and have a causative link. Because, I mean, Christian baptism, when we think of it, is either being submerged fully or partially in water to symbolize the death of Christ, and then re-emerging or coming out of the ceremony even, you know, and therefore symbolizing rising again to life with him, the resurrection. People who claim that Christ is mythological, deceptively or inadvertently, because they're just parroting it from others, use the same term, baptism, to describe the two rites, the two things that I just outlined, in hopes of making a connection. Which, if you look into it, just scratch past the surface, obviously you know that standing under a ball who's just been gutted is not very much like being dipped in the water, at all, one bit. And now we're sailing on now to the truthfulness of the New Testament account. And you've heard me say it before, but no other manuscript evidence or written work has been been pored over and scrutinized as thoroughly as the Bible. Like, that's a fact, but we're looking at the New Testament. And no other work of antiquity, written work of antiquity, has more evidence to its historical veracity than the New Testament. So those are both reassuring facts. The New Testament has more writers, I guess, than the myths, at 9 better writers. Paul, love that guy. Earlier writers than any other existing document from that era. History itself testifies that the writers went to their deaths never having rescinded their claim to have seen Christ, raised from the dead. None of them recanted, even under horrific torture. None of them. I mean, all of them went to pretty distressing deaths, other than John. However, none of them recanted. And it's been said many, many times, but, to die for a life, you can falsely claim something, you can bang a drum for it, you can go around knocking on people's doors, like getting on their nerves, whatever. To actually die for something you fully know is nonsense is very, it would be very psychologically unusual, unless the person was suffering a delusion whereby they did not think it was false, if you see what I mean. Think of it. If you were threatened to be nailed up on a cross, and all you had to do to save yourself was say, nah, not really, bro. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, something powerful, obviously the Holy Spirit, whatever, compelled them to stick to the gospel and the truth, because to die in him is to live, as it were. Coming around to the end of, like, this section, as it were. So history has shown that it takes at least 50-ish years, 2 generations before a myth can enter an historical account, because as long as there are eyewitnesses, and of course life expectancy was, well, no, I won't say biblical times because some of it was really high, but at the time of the New Testament being compiled, life expectancy was shorter, certainly for the gospel writers. But yeah, so it takes some time. You can't have eyewitnesses milling around going, nah, it never happened, or whatever. When you're trying to get a myth into an historical account, you can't have these pesky eyewitnesses around at the time and still alive, because errors can be refuted, and the establishment of mythology can be exposed as twaddle. So all the Gospels were written during the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. There were many eyewitnesses to the resurrection. Some of Paul's letters were as early as AD 50, which is 17 years after Jesus, as it were. And the thing is, with Paul's letters, he's already speaking to people who have either seen or believe as he believes. Contemporary eyewitnesses, like, he appeals to them in 1 Corinthians 15:6 to verify his testimony. So you wouldn't ask, you know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't ask somebody who knew you were talking nonsense to verify on your behalf. The New Testament claims and attests to the fact that within the century in which Christ lived and died, he wasn't mistaken for any other god, if you see what I mean. Or Jews were picking up stones left, right, and centre, but no other cults were getting involved. Going, oh, you claiming to be Horus? Like, it just didn't happen. When Paul got to Greece, when he preached in Athens, the big thinkers, as it were, of the city said he seems to be a proclaimer of strange deities, because he was preaching Christ and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new teaching is which you are proclaiming, for you are bringing some strange things to our ears. So we want to know what these things mean. They liked thinking about stuff and debating stuff as opposed to stoning people to death. And sorry, not that bit, but the preceding bit that I just said is Acts 17:18-20. So if Paul was just like digging up stories of Horus and Mithras, etc., the Athenians, for one, would have known. Like, they would have gone, because they liked discussing these things. They would have had some clue that it was just rehashed, recycled stuff, because they say this is some new and strange teaching, meaning it hasn't reached them yet. And if, like, from the nature religions, like, or cults, if dying and rising gods were like so 10 a penny in the first century, why, when Paul preached Jesus being risen from the dead, did the Epicureans and the Stoics not just say, oh, what, you mean like Mithras and that Horus? Like, no one said, oh, do you mean like that? Nothing. No recognition of this claimed plagiarism. Wrapping all that up, I'd like to, for non-Christians even, none of that, like, apart from my, stuff from the New Testament, just the logical fallacies and the fact that these claimed similarities don't exist, doesn't mean that Christ did exist, if you see what I mean. It's not a direct refutation of the claim that Christ is mythological. It's a refutation of the claim that his mythology is just lifted from other pagan sources. And the claim that Christ is just a copy originated, like I said initially, with authors like German theological works of the 1800s, who were and have been since then discounted by academia. Obviously, we don't look to academia for validation of, like, of our faith, but that's the case. They've been dismissed by everyone except, like, certain websites, or like they just come around in emails or wherever you end up seeing these pictures, mostly with the little nonsense information next to them. They also contain the logical fallacies that I outlined, and they don't compare one tiny bit to the Gospels, which are beautiful. Also, the New Testament has been scrutinized above and beyond, what's actually necessary, or what's been the scrutiny given to other religious texts. And that's 2,000 years worth of intense scrutiny. And they've stood up to the test of time. The parallels, or the alleged parallelism between these other small g gods and Christ literally evaporates in front of your eyes once you just have a look. And even the Jesus is a myth theory, if we can call it that, relies on very selective descriptors, having words redefined, as I said, false assumptions, logical fallacies, sensationalism, ill intent, one could claim. Christ is, I mean, actually, now I think of it, I should have lined it up, but I may do another one on it as a follow-up. I may not, because I haven't got a pen with me to write it down. But Lewis, I remember Lewis speaking about the dying God rising again at some length. And Lewis is he's just a don, as it were. So I'll try and dig up his assessment of it, because he wasn't refuting the claim. Well, I guess in a roundabout way he was. But yeah, he had some other thoughts on why it would be insignificant. Like, I don't want to spoil it, but basically he says that it wouldn't matter, because Christ is, there could well be echoes of such a real reality, as it were, of Christ, that because, of course, we see there are no written records of these predating cults, but they come around once the New Testament was being, circulated widely. So, yeah, something so real would have echoes. You don't want to copy a fake banknote. You want to copy the original, as it were. Christ is unique, like we know that. Come on. I don't even feel like I need to have over the point. He says, "Who do you say I am?" When the answer's given, you are Christ, the Son of God, or you are the Christ. So, he says, that answer was not given to you, but that's not from men, it's of God. We know he's not a fibber, as it were. So, I mean, what more do you want?